Within every game lie the main components we all know and love: the story, the plot twists, and the overall gameplay experience. But ask yourself, what really defines that game at its core? Well, to put it into simple terms, it's the aspect of the game we tie to ourselves. The characters. And sometimes when we dive deeper, we find things about characters that we can almost intertwine with our own selves. One that mirrors tragedy and fate. Arthur Morgan, Red Dead Redemption 2. Born in 1863 to Lyle and Beatrice Morgan, Arthur was the primary protagonist in Red Dead Redemption's beloved prequel and had grown men shedding tears when his fate was sealed. His father, a criminal who didn't partake much in his childhood, dying in prison when Arthur was still young. His mother also passed away. Off rip, you could see the tides already turning for Arthur. Around 14, Arthur was taken in by Dutch van der Linde and Hosea Matthews, who lead the van der Linde's gang. Dutch was your typical unhinged control freak. Picture a guy just violently shooting and robbing whoever during a heist. That was Dutch. The worst part of it was that it rubbed off on Arthur and diluted his perception of his own self. Hosea was the calculated one of the group, only did what he needed to do, unlike Dutch. Hosea served as an important mentor for Arthur, providing him a bold upbringing that he never had. Now let's talk about love. As for Arthur, embodied tragedy. Arthur had two love lives, each being crucial for his character development. His first one, a woman named Mary Linton, who Arthur loved during his youth. Her family didn't approve of him, but they rekindled due to Arthur needing to save Mary's brother from a cult. Safe to say that her family, not messing with Arthur, robbed him from an earlier awakening. Eliza, Arthur's second love, well kinda, taught him what family was, because she was the one Arthur had a child with. And yes, it was through a one-night stand. This was one of those situations where Arthur didn't feel as romantic with the girl as he seeked out a one-night stand. But well, he had a kid that he cared about, so he couldn't just go to the old reliable and leave for the milk. Now, being in a gang meant that Arthur couldn't see Eliza and Isaac much, and everything shifted once Arthur discovered that his family had been robbed and killed for $10. Could you imagine your loved ones being killed for $10? Arthur was pretty upset, and his whole outlook on life shifted after these turn of events. As life started crumbling down on him, it was time for another blow. He just so happened to contract tuberculosis through a victim of his who coughed blood in his mouth from earlier on in the game. It's getting real bad for our guy. Okay, let's get back to the Dutch gang. An important figure named John Marston, although being gunned down at his ranch, massively influences Arthur's awakening. John was Arthur's best friend in the gang, and he also had ambitions of leaving behind the gang for his family. As Arthur's health deteriorated, his priorities became more fixed. He finally understood what real loyalty, what real love was now that his impact on his gang diminished. He wanted to help John escape for his loved ones, and his bond with John's son Jack drove him to making that happen. In a sense, John mirrored Arthur, and their motives aligned as they realized what they really valued out of life. And you know damn well they were tired of Dutch. At the end of it all, Arthur finds himself dying, either staring at the sunset or being cold and in pain, knowing that everything he once manifested was always an arm's reach away. Some think that tragedy is defined by death, love, or both. As for Arthur, tragedy was defined by him getting old too soon and wise too late. Alessa Gillespie, Silent Hill Origins. Imagine having physics powers, being constantly bullied, having a mother that drives a cult to a dark god, and being chosen to give birth to that same god. Now imagine being a 7-year-old girl put in those shoes. That's the story of Alessa Gillespie. When most people think of their mothers, they think of a calm, nurturing, and loving soul. Well, in this case, Alessa's mom could have sworn she was Satan herself, and it would have been fitting. Well, why did her mom lead a cult then? To sum it up, everyone in the town was a little on edge, and so the nightmare began. The god impregnated her using supernatural means. For your own sanity, don't picture that. A massive fire had started in the Gillespie house, and Alessa suffered terrible burns, but as we all know, she was fine, because the god was still gestating inside of her. To people not involved, Alessa was presumed dead. Of course, she wasn't actually dead, although she probably wished she was, but rather, she was taken to a hospital and had doctors taking care of her. Well, but doctors that were manipulated by her mother, Dahlia. Could you imagine being so desperate to stop a birthing that you have to split your soul into two? Well, that's what a literal child had to resort to. Alessa split her soul, and the good half manifested a girl named Cheryl, who was adopted by Harry Mason and his wife. The fun, unfortunately, only lasted 7 years, until Cheryl and Harry returned to Silent Hill. You see, Alessa was still suffering, and she used these things as a defense mechanism from all weird things going on. As for Harry, well, he got manipulated by Dahlia. No surprise there. Cheryl does end up getting absorbed back into Alessa towards the end, but as you can guess, only tragedies exist here. In the semi-good ending, Harry prevents the birth, and instead, Alessa births a reincarnation of herself and Cheryl, and dies in the process while handing the baby to Harry. Yeah, Alessa might just be the biggest tragedy on this list. Niko Bellic, GTA 4. Niko was a character that resembled the illusion of freedom, hope, and success. He grew up in Yugoslavia and fought in the war, giving him a solid dose of PTSD early on in his life. However, during the war, he was attacked by another group. Only him and his alleged 2 other boys survived, Florian and Darko. Niko's central motive during this game was to find a better life and to take revenge on whoever betrayed him. At this point, it wasn't clear, but Niko believed it was Darko. Niko does trafficking and a bunch of illegal stuff to make ends meet until his cousin Roman sells him on the American dream. Yeah, that didn't end up being reality. Niko arrives in Liberty City excited to finally get a glimpse of life, only to realize that the nightmare was only about to start. Now he had to help his boy Roman get out of debt. All types of illegal deals happened during Niko's time at Liberty City. Little did he know, it would cost him what he loves. Niko made a couple of wrong moves, as well all do in life, and criminals don't spare him. We see that towards the end. Niko can either make a deal with this dude named Dimitri, who's kinda the mobster final boss, at the cost of Roman's life, or he gets revenge on those who wronged him, but at the cost of Kate, his girlfriend. His fate was about picking his poison, and both would forever torment the poor guy. Kratos, God of War. Losing your family is one of the most harsh tragedies there is, and Kratos was manipulated by Ares to kill his daughter and wife, and burn down his whole village. Granted that he had the illusion of being the ultimate warrior through infused rage. Although anyone is subject to change, Kratos would forever be tormented by what he did, for God's sake. The guy had his family's ashes burned upon his own flesh. As expected, Kratos does pursue a get back on Ares, and inherits being labeled as God of War once taking him down. Kratos battled the Olympians, and ultimately, Greece took the fall. Kratos flings to Egypt, meeting Faye, and has a son named Atreus. Sadly, his son's mother dies, and Kratos and Atreus have a new quest to spread Faye's ashes on top of each of the 9 realms, as that was her last wish. If this was Kratos earlier, he wouldn't have prioritized doing something like that, but he desperately seeked out change, and the peace of mind that could come along with it. Joel Miller, The Last of Us I. Imagine being a father during a zombie outbreak. Anyone's instinct would be to protect their child and make it out any way they can. Well, in Joel's case, his daughter Sarah was killed by a soldier thinking they were infected. Joel, a broken man, lay there on the ground, slowly losing his daughter, slowly losing his own self. What hurts is that Joel was just your typical caring guy who did what he could to protect those he loved, and he became a shell of his prior self after the outbreak, being consumed by grief and turning into a smuggler. A desperate Joel smuggles your typical Gen Z, bad-mouthed teenager who just so happened to be immune to the virus, Ellie. Joel felt hope in knowing that maybe, just maybe, he and Ellie could find a cure, and potentially form a father-daughter bond along the way. In an attempt to find a cure, rebels, also known as Fireflies, and doctors find that the only way to form a cure is to take Ellie's brain out, costing her life. Joel lost too much, endured grief constantly, and couldn't lose the only spark he had left. He killed doctors and Fireflies just to save Ellie. Safe to say he had his priorities straight. To end it, Joel morally lies to Ellie when she asks what happened, telling her that they couldn't make a cure. Lee Everett, The Walking Dead. Lee had a story that demonstrated deep human feelings, a little similar to Joel Miller. Basically, the guy was a convicted murderer who killed the man sleeping with his wife. A little extreme, but understandable. He lost his career, his marriage, pretty much everything that people strive for in life. He enters the apocalypse ready for anything, and nothing more extreme than what he had already endured. At the game's core, Lee forms a bond with an innocent soul left behind in the apocalypse, a young girl named Clementine who sought out protection from the unknown. Lee goes from being a lost cause, a broken substance, to finding someone who rejuvenated him. During episode 4 was when the viewers got a hint of the misfortune that was to come. Lee was bit by one of those freaking walkers while trying to find Clementine. Every player knew Lee was a slow goner and a good dude at heart. Knowing that Clementine needed him made it that much more devastating when the inevitable happened at the end of episode 5. Lee's death scene was as poetic as it got. Saving Clementine, knowing he's barely holding on, he gives every ounce of fight left to tell the young girl how to survive and how to get past his own misfortune. As Lee, you have 2 two options. Ask Clementine to shoot you, or tell her to go off on her own so she doesn't have to see someone who she loves not be there for her anymore. I'm sure you're all in your feels, as this is definitely a contender for the most gut-wrenching ending in gaming history. Thanks for watching! Any characters you feel were snubbed? Comment below who you'd like to see in part 2.